A Picot hem is a folded hem. It has a row of eyelets in the middle, which create the peaks that show along the top edge of the fold. To start, I'm knitting yellow waste yarn that is a strong contrast to my project yarn. This lesson shows starting with the Picot hem. It is a total of 30 rows and eyelets made in the middle. After the hem is hung, it would be 15 rows high. Picot hems range from 10 rows high to 40 rows high. Before you start, have 20 rows of waist knitting. Set row counter to 0 and the stitch size 1 full turn looser to make hanging that first row of hem easier. Change yarn and slip the 4-inch tail in between the face of the yarn carrier and the open needle hooks. Crank a row or about a row, then stop and reset your stitch size back 1 full turn tighter. Crank 15 rows evenly, about a row a second. This gives you an opportunity to see any dropped or incomplete stitches and make repairs quickly. Stop when the yarn carrier is approaching the yarn tail on the 14th row, and then count your rows to be sure that there are 15 rows from the first row. Then begin to transfer every other stitch to the next needle. Do not remove the empty needles. To have nicely formed peaks, the eyelets must be made exactly in the middle of the hem. Transfer your stitches just ahead of the yarn carrier, always going in the same direction as you crank, which is counterclockwise. After you have most of the eyelets made, crank around and stop just behind your transfer area to free up those last stitches needing to be transferred. Eyelets are being made on the 15th row and should be completed before the row counter advances to 16. After all the stitches are transferred, crank slowly around, then stop and reset the counter to 0 before the carrier trips to row 16. That the eyelets are completed, take a moment to see that the hem will fold in the middle of the eyelets, making nice peaks on the top of a sock, or the bars can become the loops you use if the hem is on the top of a cast-on sack. Before you hang the hem or the weight hits the floor, stop cranking and reach down and remove the weight so you can slip on the buckle around the waist yarn. Then rehang the weight. On the last row, stop cranking just as the yarn carrier reaches past the right half mark. Remove all the weight and prepare to hang the hem. Lift the knitting by the tail upward, being sure it folds along the eyelet row. This way, the stitches will not be lifted off the needles. Look for the first row purl bar above the tail and hang that to the needle in line with it. A good contrasting waist yarn in color and thickness will cut the time it takes to hang a hem by half. The very best waist yarn is one that is smooth, strong, and the same width as the sock yarn. Standard crochet cotton works best with most sock yarns. For a straight and flat hem, hang each purl bar one after another in succession, and you will have this, a beautiful picot edge for the top of your sock, or for the beginning of good cast-on sack. Now here's a way to take off that waist yarn. Just cut it away from your project and pull out the first threads you see, maybe a few rows away from your project. After you've pulled them out, that releases most of your waist. Now you can come in and just pull out and unravel the rest. Make sure you get all of them. You don't want any of your waist to show. And having those waste yarns break, well, that's the reason a good strong cotton works better. Now here's the only touch-up you need to do. Come in with your latch tool and come as close to that tail as you can. Pull it into the hem. Stretch it out just a little bit so that you know that it's not under tension, and just clip the end. That's all that's needed. For a cast-on sack finish to your Picot hem, you will need 2 double-pointed needles in a size 3. Use each needle to pick up half the bars that are between the peaks. To give your sack extra life, alternate between the front and the back bar. That way, if you clip a loop accidentally, it will not fray out. Now, I said metal needles, and I did really mean metal needles. If you have plastic or resin or wood needles that you cherish, you don't want to use them for the next step, which is to steam out those loops as they're on those metal needles. Once you're finished, you lay it out, let it cool, let it dry, and you will have beautiful loops ready for your first project.